circa 1450. The individual letters, now cast, were arranged in open compartments known as cases, ranked in alphabetical or sometimes common use or vowel-consonant order. The capital letters, sometimes called majuscule, were stored in the upper cases. The minuscule were stored in the lower cases, which is why we refer to upper and lowercase lettering to this day. Not easy to tell the letter Q from the letter P right next door to it in alphabetical order, unless you were careful, hence the importance of minding your P's and Q's. All the typed characters were known as sorts. That type of thing, that sort of thing. If you would run down your stock and found you were missing some letters or characters, you were out of sorts. So Gutenberg, bankrolled by Faust and assisted by capable, literate and efficient staff, after trial and error, applied mixtures of metal, the most economical, durable, workable alloy, lead, tin and antimony, and after a great deal of tinkering with hand molds and the unifying harmonization of letter design and type sizing, could now produce fully assorted cases of all sorts. 290 separate letterboxes, historians estimated, for his hundreds of identical E's and other vowels, his battery of consonants, commas, flourishes, ligatures, punctuation marks, fancy scrolls and accents. The next stage was to compose each line of text, working back to front. Gutenberg wanted his text to be beautiful, a creation for the ages, a proof of concept, the printing equivalent of a show home. Text was to be aligned or justified on the right as well as the left margin, so he incorporated all kinds of spaces to curve, compress, expand, and make each line check what the text for the first line would be from a handwritten master copy, and then pick up with tweezers or by hand, we can't know for sure, the first letter, place it on the extreme right. You read from left to right because everything had to be done back to front. The compositor, of course, had to work backwards and inside out. You or I might check our accuracy. And then lay a piece of paper over the form to print an impression, but properly to print off lots of pages, you needed something to press onto the paper accurately and reliably, time after time, to press. In the first episode of this podcast series, I talked about calories and how early man, as he developed language, cognition, and a greater insight into the ways of the natural world, was able to save labor calories by harnessing natural forces like fire, gravity, and wind, and construct simple calorie-efficient mechanical devices. Windmills, water mills, and sailing boats are all examples of this. Another good use of human calorie-saving ingenuity was the wine press. It took a bit of work to pull round the lever that turned the screw that lowered the bed of a press with sufficient pressure to squash hundreds and thousands of grapes, or indeed olives or apples, or whatever else you wanted to juice. But the scale of such a machine meant that it certainly took fewer calories and much less time than would be required to press each fruit singly. Such screw presses were a common sight in Rhineland, and all over Belgium. If you couldn't afford one yourself, you could get a load of fruit pressed by taking it round to a local presser, much as today we might take documents for batch reproduction. Gutenberg saw that the Common Garden wine press, with its central threaded screw and lever, could be repurposed for his needs. They had already been adapted for use in papermaking and the manufacture of lenses. He had thought of just that for printing mirrors for his Pilgrim's magic ray device. Lenses were becoming more and more in demand for eyeglasses too, a growing industry in medieval Europe, which is worth a digression. You're listening to Stephen Fry's Great Leap Years. I'll be back after a short interval.
Network in America. I never looked so good. You look the same. But with this camera, everything looks better. Especially me.
You haven't changed your hair in 15 years. Selfie? Check, please.
What are you making?
Did an extra all. If you were watching a film set in Chaucer's day and spotted an extra or leading actor wearing glasses, you'd probably hoot with laughter at such a terrible mistake. But actually, by Chaucer's and then Gutenberg's time, they were relatively old news, having been around since the 13th century. 12 perverts, if you prefer. The magnificent rooms in the 14th century church of St. Agnes in Causton, Norfolk, in whose choir I once sang so badly that the bishop himself begged me to stop, depicts many of the saints, one of whom, St. Matthew, is portrayed sporting an unmistakable and strikingly modern-looking pair of spectacles. It's not an impertinent later addition, but original to the screen. St. Matthew wrote one of the Gospels, of course, had been a tax collector before Christ summoned him as a disciple, so in the medieval mind was a clerkly sort of fellow, best depicted with the spectacles that were now the rage in Europe. They were not cheap, but as we shall soon see, the very highest in Christendom favoured them. To some extent, one might consider that without spectacles and magnifying glasses, Gutenberg's technology would have been a great deal more expensive and harder to get off the ground. Most of his important clients would be likely to have been advanced in years enough to need reading glasses. And without their existence in the world, Gutenberg would have had to create pages of much, much larger type, pushing up the price of his printed works immeasurably.
The hell is that?
Printed books without glasses and lenses would not be quite as impossible as skyscrapers without elevators, but the development of the printing press does neatly demonstrate the downward force with much more accuracy and precision. He hired a carpenter called Conrad Zasbach to make a press according to his specifications. Imagine a fine wooden structure as tall as you, assuming you're between 5 foot and 7 foot tall. A central threaded spindle has a leaf attached to it, and a flat ball platen at its lower end. The lever or bar is nicknamed the Devil's Tail. Printing is filled, as we've already seen, with marvellous specialist words, nicknamed slang and jargon. Pulling the Devil's Tail one way round lowers the platen, and pulling it the other way raises it. So far, so simple. I have to remind you how necessary it is for a book's pages all to be absolutely in alignment. The horizontals must be horizontal, and the verticals perfectly perpendicular to them. The human eye catches any mistake, and you have to throw it all away and start again. The form, snug in its chase with its perfectly set letters and characters, is set into a stone bed called a coffin. It's all tightly constrained and registered and calibrated. Now, ink must be applied to the type. Water-based ink could run and blot, so Gutenberg developed his own oil-based ink, another crucial step in his cascade of innovations. Essentially, this ink was a kind of black varnish that would stick to the paper and keep its shape, shine, and perfect definition and sharp resolution. The printmaster would take out a marvellous leather pad for inking, with a round pad made of dog skin stuffed with wool. Let us hope the dogs in question had died of their skin was preferred because dogs don't sweat, and their hides are therefore impermeable, non-porous. This ball is applied to Gutenberg's special oil-based ink and then gently padded, rolled and pressed onto the rows of type. If you ever used a school printing press or those John Bull rubber-type kits, you'll know how important it is that the type is firmly set, or the sticky ink will lift letters out of the form. Disaster. You lay the paper over the inked form. It should be damp paper, because that keeps a better, clearer impression of the ink, the bite of the ink, as they call it. You align your damp paper in a frame called a frisket and cover it with a tympano, a straight cuff. Now you winch the table in with a windlass so that it lies exactly under the platen. You walk the devil's tail round to descend the platen onto this mixture of coffin, frisket, tympanum, form and chase. So many variables, so many ways to go wrong. Apply the ink unevenly and you've got a blotchy or non-uniformly black page. Align the page even slightly wrongly and the human eye will pick up lines that are off true, not parallel to the paper's edge. Precision was all. The slightest error, blemish or misalignment was fatal to the enterprise. Try to imagine, if you can, the frustration, the botched, messy attempts, the effort, the labour, and above all, the expense. Paper was created by hand. It made some use of automatic power, but was a long process and consequently expensive. Vellum, parchment, derived from the dried and treated skin of calves, that was even more fantastically costly. I cannot describe the thrill of raising the platen, lifting off the paper, turning it, and seeing a perfectly printed page. I don't need to describe it. Go to YouTube and enter the search Stephen Fry and the Gutenberg Press. I had a hand in the project of making a replica of Gutenberg's first press, and we made a film. In Basel, a perfectly beautifully printed page on one of whose lines was an E that I had carved and typecast. That was a moment I shall never forget. It gave me goose pimples, goosebumps, goose flesh. What a coup, Johannes Gutenberg, nee Gensfleisch. One can do little more than doff one's cap and bow. This was an achievement that was to transform the world, to shake and uproot the hierarchical tree that had seemed so firmly and permanently planted, fundamentally to shift the old